About a week ago, I went over this company called CSAT Solutions. There was an interesting post on Reddit that talked about the working conditions at this company that serves as a warranty repair depot for Apple. They perform services for Apple for machines that are in warranty. And it was an interesting post about the working conditions, about how things get done. You can find that post on Reddit on r/Apple. This is my favorite page on the internet. So you'll find that he was talking about how there's no schedule at the company. People who have been there for really long periods of time don't get bonuses, but people who just got hired do. The air quality is terrible. The refurbished motherboards are terrible. And I reached out to him just out of curiosity. Now, I decided that I was not going to do any follow up on this company until I could get really hard proof and evidence that these people worked for the company and that they weren't just trolling. Because you never know, it could just be an anti Apple troll that just wanted to make things up and stir the pot. So at this point, I'm very satisfied that I have enough identifying information from this individual to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they do work for CSAT Solutions. And I've sent them a bunch of questions, some of them my own, some of them were your questions, and I'd like to go over them today in the stream. So I've redacted some information, so if you hear me just say something something or say something really vague, that means that I redacted information that was identifying because I don't want him getting into further trouble at the company just as a result of talking to us. I feel that's the least we can do. So I've redacted some information using this lovely PDF editor. So I asked, the roundtable meetings with employees sound interesting. What do you mean by I would have to answer for that when it comes to not taking lunch breaks versus finishing work? He says, my position at CSAT is, I don't want to say the exact name of the position, and he's been in that position for a very long time. I don't want to give the exact amount of years away because it gets closer to giving away who he is. He says before that he was a technician. His main responsibility is that units reach the test line and are able to ship out. Management is very strict about work in progress. Every day, we have to answer for why there are any units left over that didn't make it to the test line. Naturally, there are some things that are out of our control. So because he has to answer for any units that don't make it to the test line, while he technically has a lunch break, it's set up so that if you take the lunch break, you will then get in trouble for not getting the amount of units done. There's a bit of give and take here. As a business owner myself, I have hired people that work at a slow speed to the point where if they took any sort of break whatsoever, they would not be able to get their job done. It's my job as a business owner to figure out, is that because I'm giving you too much work? Is that because I haven't given you the right tools? Or is that because you are genuinely too slow for this job? If somebody is genuinely too slow for that job and you coach them, you work with them, and you can't get them up to speed, you try to get them the right tools to see if they can get up to speed. If that doesn't work, you let them go. In my opinion, this is just my opinion, you let them go rather than continue to force them to try to live up to a standard they can't live up to, which then leads to them not taking lunch breaks. Or maybe you have to change your process a little bit. So if I have one person that's not living up to standard, but everybody else is, and that while taking lunch breaks and doing a good job, I'll focus on that one individual. If nobody's living up to the standard being put forth, then I have to take a look at my business model and my standards. Personally speaking, this in and of itself is not the worst thing in the world, just because you know, we get ridiculous amounts of machines in. We have customers calling every 20 minutes asking for a status update. This is a fast-paced industry. Nobody wants to wait for their repair, and that is going to get passed on to the people who work there. And it's very difficult to balance customer expectations with treating your employees like human beings. And it seems like they're failing a little bit here. Now, my next question is, what are the points that you think are most important for consumers to know about the work that goes on at CSAT? He says, unless it's physical damage, we're not really repairing anything, not like you do. The person that gets your machine at the repair depot does not have the time to properly troubleshoot your Mac. Management's biggest concern is numbers shipped. If technicians spend upwards of 30 minutes troubleshooting, they're not meeting their numbers. By the way, they do mention that we should properly troubleshoot. The problem is that they push everyone to ship out a certain number of units. Every day is a constant struggle between doing things the right way or the fast way. This, in my opinion, leads to poor workmanship. And again, it is difficult to balance doing everything 110% perfectly right to to getting workflow done. I talk about this when I deal with donor boards. Why do you use donor boards? Because if I have to replace 16 components, looking through a book for each of the 16 components when you have customers calling every 20 minutes is not practical. You have to come up with practical ways to do it. But if you cannot come up with any practical way to do diagnosis properly, then you have a problem that in my opinion you have to look into. So it seems like the what he wants people to know above all is that they don't have the time to properly troubleshoot, and there are a lot of pieces of poor workmanship. Now, one of the reasons that I'm bringing this up is because there is this idea, this concept that I've been reading about, particularly in Reddit threads when people are talking about right to repair and things of this nature. There's this idea that when you go to an Apple authorized facility, that you are getting this white glove treatment in a perfect clean room, and that the person working on it is doing, the best job that they can. But in reality, if anything, you wind up getting it done by one of these repair mills where they get so much stuff, and they're so crunched for time that you can't even spend a half hour trying to figure out somebody's problem, to where it's just in, out, in, out, in, out, where you may get less attention going to an authorized repair facility than you do going to an unauthorized repair facility. There are many unauthorized repair facilities that do things improperly, that reflow dead GPUs and give it back to customers, that will buy the cheapest iPhone screen there is that looks like crap and give it back to the customer. There's many problems with unauthorized repair that I try to go into, but there's also a problem with authorized repair. And this idea that when you go to the authorized center or the warranty service center that you're getting this white glove service is the type of thing that I want to push back against, and it seems like this gentleman is as well. I asked, what is the worst fix you personally implemented or saw someone else implementing in order to get work done in time? He said, I would say replacing a motherboard because it has a firmware password. I've never done this, but know people that have. Instead of sending this unit to a call center for the customer or Apple to be contacted for the password, a tech will make something up and switch out the motherboard and address any other issues at that point. This is bad for two reasons. One, you and I have both talked about the quality of the refurbished parts, which in the past exchange we had, he was saying that the refurbished boards were pretty terrible. And two, I can't be sure of this unless some of your viewers and Apple customers give input, but I would imagine the customer has to pay for that. Now, this is wasteful because you're taking a board that has a password lock on it and you're essentially just tossing it out. Now, whether Apple has to pay for this or whether the customer has to pay for this, that's still a waste of a board. And he says the tech at this point completes the repair and ships it out rather than having to wait on the call center for the password. Switching out the motherboard for a password isn't even a fix. That's how bad it is here. What if the machine you send in only has an operating system issue? You just had a motherboard replaced for no reason at all. Now, this is a part of what happens when you put these when you put these limits on people and say, you have to answer for why this number of machines did not go out in a day. When you put that intense amount of pressure on people, they are going to do things like go, I could make up that there's something wrong with this board to get the board replaced, which takes a minute, or I could spend 20 minutes on the phone with a call center and then not hit the number of machines I have to get fixed. And this is a real problem. So you have a board that has a really basic issue, but then you wind up with somebody else's refurbished crap board just over a firmware password. That's pretty bad. I asked, are you allowed creativity in fixes, such as coming up with your own or improving on fixing procedures? He says, not really. The process engineering team comes up with the repair processes, and that's pretty much it. Some of these processes are very outdated, so much so that the documents still show the old company name on them. And just to now, this company, as I talked about in my prior video, has had issues where they were employees walking out, staging protests because they were getting a few bucks a repair, and to fix the image problems, they changed the company name, and that was a very long time ago. Next question. Are you only allowed to implement repair procedures exactly as written? He says pretty much yes. My next question. When it comes to warranty repair jobs like the U8900 fix on the 2012 A1398 MacBook Pro with the 8203332 board, is it Apple coming up with the idea to put rubber pads in the chips, or companies like CSAT? And I'm assuming that you even see these at all. He said, it's been a while since I worked on those models. My understanding is that all of these implementations are from Apple. The rubber pad you showed on your video is not the only one used for that model. There was also another set of pads around the CPU and GPU, I believe. We were instructed to scrap boards that didn't have these pads as units. Without them, they would cause kernel panics. Even the mid 2014 and newer mid 2015 with Force Touch Macs have foam pads on the heatsink screws. This is, if I remember correctly, to prevent kernel panics. There are those pads on the heatsink screws. So it seems like it is not the warranty service facility coming up with those fixes. It is Apple themselves. Next, are machines triaged first by someone else, grouped in piles, then fixed in bulk without individual testing to confirm that they were correctly diagnosed? What is the end-to-end flow of a device through CSAT? Answer: no. They are divided by model and distributed among 6 groups. The flow goes like follows. Units arrive in the morning, around 6 a.m. The receiving team processes them and assigns them to big blue totes. Blue totes are for regular incoming units, and red totes are for looper units. After receiving processes them, they are divided by models, and the line leads of each group come get the units and go distribute them. The technician gets the unit and is responsible for doing a visual mechanical inspection and troubleshooting it. Everyone must attempt to run MRI, Mac Resource Inspector, in AST or AST2, Apple Service Toolkit Diagnostic Suite. If you've brought the machine to an Apple store, you probably noticed them using these diagnostics. The tech will determine the problem and try to resolve it accordingly. Like I mentioned before, we don't do component level repair. If a sensor is failing or you have no video due to a capacitor or whatever, you're probably getting a new motherboard. There are pretty much 4 major components: top case assembly with battery, main logic board, SSD, and clamshell/LCD. The tech will determine if it's a functional failure or customer-induced damage at this point. They will requote it if they think it's customer-induced damage like liquid spill or damage from a drop. These units will go to the call center, and they have their own process of contacting Apple so that they in turn can contact the customer. After a repair is done, technicians are required to run MRI diagnostics again, as well as other tests in AST or AST2. The diagnostics vary by group, but the main one is MRI. Then they go to the Phoenix test line. This part takes a little longer. It used to be 8 hours, but I think they cut that time in half now, I believe. If something else fails during this testing, it will go back to the tech for the process to start over. This is where some of the frustration comes from. A lot of the failures here are due to bad parts. You have a certain quota you have to meet, and now you have to work on the same unit again. After a unit passes the Phoenix test, it goes to shipping. There is a team here called Out-of-Box Audit. They select a percentage of units for inspection. If nothing is wrong with the units, they are then shipped out. Now, this is an interesting part here. Let me just reread this over. If something fails during the testing, you will have to go back to the tech for the process to start over. This is where the frustration comes from. A lot of these failures here are due to bad parts. Now, something that I've complained about is that I can't just buy an ISL 6259 from Intersil. I cannot buy an iPhone screen from Apple. I cannot buy a battery from Apple, which is why I have to go through the complete and utter crap of digging through China to find somebody that will send me things and pray and hope that what they send me is good, and then pray and hope that it's not going to get caught in customs and all that. What's really interesting to me is that even when you go to an authorized repair facility, what happens is that you still have to deal with a company that has parts issues. And I imagine most of what he's talking about here is boards, because he's talked about the quality of the refurbished boards. So the parts don't even necessarily have that high quality that you would expect coming from an authorized service facility. And this is particularly surprising even to me, because I've said, one of the pros of going to an authorized service facility, even if you don't get the white glove treatment, at least you're getting a good part. You're getting a good screen. Whereas when you go to an independent, you're getting maybe a good knockoff, a good refurb, or a really bad knockoff. And there's that, you never know if you're getting that mall stand crappy phone repair shop screen put in your phone. So it's a surprise even to me that you have these issues. Next, have you ever gotten in trouble with OSHA? Answer: once, I believe. The building had one set of restrooms for what I think is over 500 people. I can't be sure how many people are at this location, but it seems like a lot these days. They've had to rent an extra parking lot for overflow. One set of bathrooms for over 500 people. One set of bathrooms for over 500 people. One set of bathrooms for 500 people. What are the plus sides to working at CSAT? You say you have been there for about a decade, so I imagine there are some plus sides, or it's just a case of being there being no place else to work. Many are curious why you would keep or take a job with CSAT. He said, honestly, it's a paycheck. I have worked here for crossed out years. There are really no plus sides. When I first started here, I thought I would learn some soldering at least. Instead, I've taken it now upon myself as a New Year's resolution to learn on my own time. I had an interesting conversation with someone the other day. They asked me what was something that distinguished people in the US from not the entire rest of the world, but a lot of other countries. My mind started to wonder about all the cliche stuff we often talk about: freedom, democracy, capitalism, etc. And then this person said our cell phones. And it struck me a bit. He said, when you walk into CSAT, you're walking into a third world country. Because of the concern for data privacy, we're not allowed to have our phones inside. I'm sure there are other jobs that are high security that probably don't allow you to have a phone. By contrast, I worked at Redacted. Before this, we used to build server racks for Redacted, and we were allowed to have our phones with us and step out to answer calls. What I'm trying to say is that it's really hard to answer calls from recruiters or other jobs if you're stuck at CSAT all day without a phone, not to mention emergency calls from friends or family. I have to balance wanting to finish my work with taking breaks to walk the length of a football field to the second floor break room to check if I've received any calls. A real sad thing that happened at CSAT not too long ago, not at my building, but at the building that handles Dell. I don't know all the details, but a man showed up for work and didn't realize he hadn't dropped off his sleeping toddler at the babysitter. He didn't come back until about 7 p.m. The kid died of being in a car all day in Texas summer heat. 7-month-old found dead in father's car in northwest Houston. A baby boy was found dead in a car. Had dropped off two other kids to daycare before arriving at his job at 9:30 a.m. The baby usually gets dropped off separately to a sitter. Police said the man's wife called to see where their baby was. The father went out to his vehicle around 7:30 p.m. and found the child unresponsive in his car seat. This is a bit of a tricky one. So when it comes to cell phones, to be clear, I let all of my employees have a cell phone here. Yes, we deal with sensitive data. We do iPhone data recovery, we do hard drive data recovery, and a lot of this is for people that want their data to stay secure. I hire people that I know are not going to screw around with data. I have a company culture where if somebody starts doing that, I would be alerted of it, and that would be smacked down immediately. But here's the thing with cell phones, and here's where it starts to get tricky. I don't I understand why a company does not want people on their cell phone while they're paying them to do their job. I completely get that. I understand that. Now, at the same time, like I let everybody here have a cell phone. So, and I let them use it during work time. What I assume that if I'm hiring somebody that is an adult, that is competent, that if I want them to act like an adult and do their job like an adult, that I have to treat them like an adult. If I treat you like a third grader by taking your Game Boy because I see that you have it in your pocket, then I'm going to get a third grade level of work out of you. You have to you have to treat people like adults if you're going to get that treatment back. Now, I assume if somebody's using their phone or taking a call, one of three things. A, it's a serious emergency. B, you have done so much work and gotten so much shit done from your queue that, yeah, you earned yourself a 1 or a 10 minute break to take a phone call. It's usually one of those things. But you can't. But I am on the fence about it because if I had somebody that was just taking calls all day and not getting their work done, I would be aggravated about it. Now, when it comes to this story about this, this guy that where his son was found dead in the car because he forgot to drop the kid off at daycare, and the guy's wife called to see where the baby was. Yes, if he had his cell phone, would he have said, "Oh crap, I forgot the kid in the car"? Absolutely. Is it his fault for leaving the kid in the car? Yes, absolutely. But again, at this point, if you have a policy where people cannot have a cell phone on them in the case of an emergency, if I were the person who came up with that policy, I'd be feeling a little shitty. Even if it was I tend to go back to personal responsibility. There's really no excuse for leaving a kid in a hot car and locking the yeah, there's no excuse for that. But at the same time, this is why, cell phone emergency call. Just saying, if this dude had been working at my company, he would have got that call. And also, the other thing to talk about here is the paycheck. So when I looked at the pay for this guy who's been there for just about, almost a decade, it was $15 an hour. And it was about 40 hours a week. So now, when it comes to pay, this is in Houston. I believe this is in Houston. I start people out at $15. Like $15 an hour is my lowest tier. So that is, you barely know how to reassemble things. You can't really diagnose problems. You can just reassemble and do the most basic stuff. You don't speak English, so that, like, you speak English so bad that if everybody here is picking up the phone because we have a bunch of phones ringing, you can't do that because you won't be able to speak to them. Like, that's the lowest tier that I have. You will get more than that if you're able to speak English. You'll get more than that if you can diagnose issues. You will get way more than that if you can fix boards. And that is right out the gate. And even those individuals getting the 15, they'll typically get a bump up soon thereafter. So the wages there are fairly low because essentially there's one of these it's one of these things where I remember working at Avatar Studios a long time ago before they got bought out by Berkeley, and there was a gentleman there who was 13 years older than me who had a master's degree in the tech room, and he was getting $12 an hour. And the way I looked at it as an intern, and then when I finally got hired there as an entry level tech, is I thought I could get a master's degree, I could spend 12 more years here, and I would probably be making $12 an hour. And it's one of those things that kind of it really breaks the motivation and the self-esteem because I could be here and I could do my job well for another 10 years. I'm not going anywhere. What type of training, if any, do they issue to new start employees with no previous experience so that they are able to fix Apple products? Answer: a 2 weeks training that doesn't involve much in troubleshooting. It's more of disassembly, CSAT processes, and using the shop floor system type of training. The disassembly part is the worst. The person in charge of the training does the best he can with what he's got, and what he has are a bunch of broken down MacBooks that are missing a bunch of screws and parts with broken connectors, etc. So again, this idea that when you go to the authorized repair center, that when you send it back for warranty, that you are getting that white glove treatment from somebody who knows your Mac inside out. In reality, the person working on it likely knows less than the teenagers who watch my YouTube channel for more than a couple of weeks. And I'm being serious with this. I really do want to push back against this idea that only the authorized service center knows what they're doing. Only the authorized service center gives you that white glove treatment. If they did, at least there would be an argument that when you go to the manufacturer, you're going to the person who made the device, and they're going to know how everything is put together better than anybody else, and they're going to be able to know things that even Lewis doesn't know. Fine, if that were true, at least we could have an argument there. But that is not the case whatsoever, and it's important to inform people of that, to just break this conditioning that the manufacturer is the only one who can fix the product. How is a non-skilled worker instructed in what to do to troubleshoot a problem? If it is a checklist type procedure to be done, who wrote it, and how does it deal with hard to diagnose problems? Answer: there are documents created by the process engineering team, but no one reads them, and they're not forced to. I read them during the 2 weeks training, but it's all pretty much redundant if you've worked in a computer before. The problem is that they hire people that I can tell have never worked on a computer before. Let me just repeat that before I even get to the commentary. The problem is that they hire people that I can tell have never worked on a computer before. And it's not like they can't learn, but on-the-job training on expensive Macs is probably bad for the customer. I think they just hire people and they assume that if they have done some computer work, they'll pick up the rest at some point. Again, I don't quite know how the customer is charged. Maybe they can chime in after your update. But if the customer has to eat the charge for someone misdiagnosing their machine, it's pretty bad. I'm not going to make the white glove comment again. I'm just going to read this sentence one more time. That'll be the commentary. The problem is they hire people that I can tell have never worked on a computer before. How often do you have to come up with a crappy but faster solution to manage finishing work at a decent hour? Or do you leave late because you refuse to do so? I leave late because I try to do the best job I can. I'm not alone in this. There are people here that do care about the work they do. There are many that don't. We see it every day. Misaligned boards, misaligned LCDs, scratches that weren't there on the bottom cases, etc. 12. Now, the reason that this question is coming up, is because it's interesting. Let me just I just wanted to bring something up here. One of the interesting things here that people have asked is there's approximately 500 people at the company. Approximately 75% of those employees are Vietnamese. So there is, and a lot of them don't speak English. So there is this question of, if there's 2.3 million people in Houston, Texas, and you've got 38,000 Vietnamese people in Houston, Texas, then the question then becomes, why is it that somewhere around like 0.5 or 1% of the population makes up in that area makes up 75% of your workforce. Now, when I was reading the reviews on Glassdoor for the company, there was one individual that was talking about the pay. It was $9 to $14 an hour. He said that there are extreme working conditions, communication issues, since 80% of them are Vietnamese and barely speak English. People talk behind your back, very repetitive. Um, the benefits are a joke. They lied at me. They lied to me about the pay. So he's talking about the pay being bad and all of this. And somebody and says from CSAT Solutions subscribes to a policy of equal opportunity employment, making employment available without regard to race, color, religion, national origin, or citizenship status. According to the Immigration and Control Act of 1986, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, disability, veteran status, or genetic information are not taken into consideration when making employment decisions. Please be aware this is a public forum, and the comments regarding race, ethnicity, company policies, and sexual preference are false, offensive, biased, and inappropriate. Let's be real here. You're not the fucking civil rights activist of the laptop repair industry. You're not. Just like stop pretending to be. Like the problem when it comes to things like race is it's very difficult to have a conversation without people getting really stupid about it and getting really emotionally charged on both sides. But no, this is not offensive. This is not inappropriate. And this is not biased. This is a legitimate question. So, and it is one of those things where you have to be able to notice patterns and ask important questions and not be stupid about it. So, you're high. So, you think about this as a pattern. Now, keep in mind, I don't care if you have a Vietnamese owned business. I don't care if you are a Kenyan immigrant and your little hardware store is 90% Kenyans. I don't care if you're, a German musician and your studio when you move to the United States is 90% German. I understand that. With small business, you hire the people you know, you hire your family, you hire your friends, and those are probably going to be the people that are close to you. I understand that. And there's no problem with that. That being said, once you grow to having a company of about 500 people, here's where it starts to get funny. When you have 500 people, now you have an accusation that you have this sweatshop labor conditions, that you have low pay, that the place has terrible air quality, that you have unrealistic expectations, terrible benefits, terrible work environment. So you have this sweatshop-like working environment. You have hundreds of people complaining about this. Like right over here alone, you have 91 reviews on this one website that are 2 stars. So a lot of people are talking about these terrible working conditions. And then it's funny, this company that has these terrible working conditions just so happens to have 75 to 80% of their staff Vietnamese individuals, many of which don't speak English, who make up about 1% of the population but make up 75 to 80% of the company. No, you are not. Don't give me this canned response. We care about equal opportunity employment bullshit. Let's be real here. People who do not speak English are less likely to complain about crappy working conditions. If you hire people based on H-1B visa, and again, I am not sure if they do, but to be clear, when we go into conversations about H-1B visa, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to jump jobs when you are in the United States on these types of visas. You work for the employer that sponsored you, or you go back. Now, people who have choices, people who don't have to worry about going back to a country that they don't want to go back to if they quit, are probably going to quit. The individuals who are typically more likely to put up with these poor working conditions and low pay are the individuals who are between a rock and a hard place, which are typically going to be the new Vietnamese immigrants. So let's not pretend over here that people who point this out and say, hey, I notice your company has really bad working conditions, and at the same time, I notice that you tend to really focus in on that 1% of the population, that 0.5% of the local population that doesn't speak English. What's up with that? Because if you are an equal opportunity employer, then it kind of makes me wonder, if you are equal opportunity, why are you focusing in on 0.5% of the population and making them 75 to 80% of your hires? Again, do not pretend. You ain't Martin Luther King Jr., you ain't Rosa Parks, you are not the civil rights leader of the laptop repair industry. In my opinion here, you are trying to hire people with shit working conditions who ain't going to complain. Let's just be real here and be able to have a real discussion without throwing out the words offensive, biased and inappropriate. Fuck off with that. Like, you know what you're doing. You know what you're doing, and the people who are watching this know what you're doing. Okay, now let's move on a little bit. My question, does CSAT make use of the H-1B visa system? Answer, I think so. There are people here that aren't U.S. citizens. I guess the real answer is I don't know. What do the employees think of CSAT and Apple specifically? Who would they blame more for the poor working conditions? I guess almost everyone blames CSAT, though many of us wonder how Apple can be okay with it. We hear the stories about Foxconn, and though our conditions are not quite the same, we're still somewhat surprised this happens in the United States. The worst part for me is that we're probably not doing that bad compared to other workers in the United States. I read on Reddit about how Aldi allows their cashiers to sit while they work. It seemed like something so innate that I wondered how this could be surprising to me. Reading the comment section, that posts there seemed to be a pattern. Most of these companies that had great working conditions for their employees were German. And I was reminded about your previous video where you talked about CSAT and how you pay your employees a good wage and have a clean environment for them to work in. A happy employee makes you money. I consider myself a good employee. I know it doesn't mean much coming from myself, but I see other people at CSAT that are equally good and hardworking. If they work this hard when you don't pay them enough, imagine what they would do if you did. Yeah. So it seems interesting because I asked, is this a problem with Apple not paying enough to support a company treating people well, or is it that Apple's paying enough but CSAT is simply treating the people like crap? And his guess is that just about everybody blames CSAT. So it's interesting to have that insight. And again, just to be clear, because I'm seeing this in chat, I have absolutely no problem with you hiring immigrants. I hire immigrants. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just you have to be able to look at a pattern. Shit working conditions, hiring people that don't speak English on a visa system where they're probably not allowed to get another job, and them being the majority of your workforce. You have to be able to see patterns. And when you look at that pattern, it paints a certain picture that is worth looking at. All right. Why have you not formed a union? Answer. There is talk about this already since my initial post on Reddit. I have asked a few people, and they seem to be on board with the idea. Interesting. There's been so they're actually thinking about unionizing since this occurred. 15. Do undocumented individuals work there? Answer. Not to my knowledge. So, 16. Why is CSAT staff mostly Vietnamese when Vietnamese people make up approximately 1 to 2% of Houston's total population? Answer. I cannot be certain as to why. I will say this. Vietnamese people don't complain. Imagine that. They are extremely hardworking people, to a fault even. Someone told me that after the Reddit post in your video, word got around to people. They are scared that this might end up hurting us instead of helping. My hope is that it helps. Last question. What would be the ideal result of your postings and attention being placed on CSAT? Answer. I suppose it's several things. I would hate for us to lose work because of this. At the same time, I am a consumer, and I feel bad when I get cheated out of my money as well. People should know what goes on with products that, in some cases, they have saved money to purchase when they send them in for repair. As you mentioned in your video, you walk into an Apple store and the lighting is bright and the environment is clean, the air conditioning works, and you assume this is the same type of environment your machines will be repaired in. It's not. Also, the quality of the parts, motherboards especially. I don't need to tell you how bad the refurbishing of these parts is. And yet when we replace a motherboard and it fails, the CSAT technician takes the blame and it counts against us. You mentioned in your video that CSAT could just be doing the best they can. This could be true. I have no knowledge of their budget or structure, but I will give you this example. On the newer Macs, removing the bottom case is a bit weird. I've seen you do it before on your videos. Apple made some fixtures that help us remove them. Really, all you need is a suction cup. CSAT went and bought about 10 or 12 machines from China, not fixtures from Apple, that do this using air. They come in sets. One opens the unit, the other closes it. From what I heard from a reliable source is that these machines cost about $60,000 each. Not the set, each. These machines are almost always down or out of order. That's $750,000 on something that is unnecessary. Overall, the ideal outcome would be for them to change how they treat their workers. Giving out retention bonuses to new hires simply because they stay for 3 months is a slap in the face to the employees that have already stayed for 10 years, or more in some cases, and have never received a raise. So people could stay there for 10 years and never receive a raise. Improve the work environment. I realize not everyone likes their job. It doesn't help when we have one single water fountain and it's a football field away. The last time we had heavy rains in Houston and the city was flooded, CSAT was the only company to ship anything out of the city. We know because the company CEO had a meeting with us and told us so. People showed up for work when the rest of the city was shut down. In fact, if you called the weather hotline for the company, you got a message that said that the company was opening and operating normally until maybe the afternoon, the first day the city was flooded. They eventually changed the message to something like, if you feel you can't get to work safely, stay home. Those that could showed up and worked long hours. Last year, we had a winter storm, rare in Houston. The streets were frozen, which is uncommon and dangerous in the South for people not used to it. It wasn't until midday when the weather was worse that they decided to send people home. All these types of practices need to change. So there's a flood, you're going to work. There's a storm, you're going to work. One of the interesting things here is they're talking about the quality of the motherboards being absolutely awful. Now, one of the questions I didn't ask, but that I would like to ask is, who is giving them these refurbished boards that suck? And, because if, let's say, if you're not the company, if you're not the individual wow, look at this. Job reviews, 2 stars. Indeed, 2.7 stars. 2 stars. Oh man. Anyway, what kind of makes me wonder here is, who is it doing the logic board repair where these boards are such terrible quality? Is it Apple doing it, or is it CSAT doing it? Because what's confusing to me is he says that we don't do the type of repairs you do. We don't go in depth and do the soldering or anything. Maybe his department doesn't do it, but maybe there's another department at CSAT that does. And when I look at their homepage, right over here, you see it says Main Logic Board Repair, a proven market leader supporting many of the OEM and ODM manufacturers. CSAT Solutions offers efficient diagnosis and chip component level repair technology, including BGA chip replacement. And when you click View Details, it looks like they, let's see, if they, yeah, so this person has an oscilloscope, they have a microscope that looks similar to mine, and it looks like he's working on a motherboard over here. So they do claim to do motherboard repairs. So this terrible board repair that they're talking about, are these refurbished boards that came from Apple? Or is there another department at CSAT that's doing those board repairs? And if so, are they, due to the fact that they're getting paid a very low amount of money and also forced to do them really quickly, doing terrible board repairs? It's always possible. Now, this is what's interesting here is then, again, he's just talking, now the waste of money. Like, my Jesus. I mean, you see that I don't like the way that I have to open the new Touch Bar MacBook Pros. The bottom case comes off like a pain in the ass. It's a pain in the ass. I know it's a pain in the ass. I use my screwdriver. I use this little pry thing. I go, and I get it out. You spend $600,000 on tools to remove them. $600,000 spent on tools just to open a case that don't even work anymore, and you can't give your employees a raise. I don't know. So, yeah, I will let you guys take from this what you will. And I will let you all take from this what you will. I have actually a couple more emails to go through, so I will have more information coming shortly. Again, I just want to confirm that any individual that I speak to actually works there. I don't want to publish any more stuff unless I have proof beyond a shadow of a doubt that the person emailing me actually does work there and is not just a troll. So that's it. I'm just going to edit this up a little bit for posting it on the main channel, and see you in the next one.